My name is Jennine Krauchi and I'm a Metis beadwork artist. I grew up in Winnipeg until I was 14 and then moved to Brandon. I'm Metis on my mother's side. My dad was Dutch. He was the one that taught me how to sew. And it was, with him, it was kind of like, if you want to do this, here's some leather or some fur, and if you need some help, I'm right here. And of course he would always be right over my shoulder. To the point where it's like, okay, you go over there. I'm going to stay here, and if I need help, I will certainly ask. My mom did do beadwork, but it was later on in her life too. But I grew up with everything you see in this room. I grew up with, been very aware of my background. Métis. Well, especially with my mom being Métis, and she was from the Interlake region. And then with my dad, and my dad was, he really instilled in both my mom and I to keep our culture alive, to make sure it never died. So it was, that part of it, it's always been there. It's like the music, the food, the hunting, fishing, all of those things have always been there. As you can see, that's my mom's, one of her, she wanted to get rid of it. I said, no, I'm going to keep your deer. And my dad got that mounted for it. But I grew up with all of, we didn't say we were, this is our Métis lifestyle. It was just a lifestyle that happened to be Métis. It was in the late 90s. So just really the start of people getting back into their culture and doing beadwork. At that time too, there was maybe, as far as Métis beaders, you could probably have a tough time having enough women around a kitchen table of Métis beaders. And now it's just blowing out of proportion almost, but which is great. It's really nice to see the younger people getting involved with beadwork and actually teaching some of the elders and older people how to do their own culture. It started out very small. There was more and more classes being done, more workshops, and you saw more and more people getting involved, wanting to know about their culture, their background, wanting to bring these types of pieces back and start creating their own. The Métis are also getting more and more involved with their beadwork and actually wanting to know more about the history of it, because it was hidden also for such a long time. And there was years in there was no place to really sell your wares or to have it out on display. And some people hid it. They hid their beadwork. So, but I see it now, a lot of beaders coming out and younger people and doing contemporary, contemporary Métis beadwork, which is, I find really exciting. Yeah. So if somebody's coming in and wanting to get, say, a jacket or a vest or anything, so we sit down and I like to hear a lot about their life and what they're like, and what's important in their life. So I take all of those pieces from them and I incorporate it into beadwork. And so their story is in the beadwork itself. And so it's a real personal thing. And once that pattern's used, I won't use it again. I won't tell their story because it's up to them to tell their story. And I won't let anybody else ever use that pattern. So it's theirs. But it's a process. And I really get to know the person that I'm doing it for. Okay. I do all the design and then I put it onto brown paper, and then the brown paper goes onto the fabric itself, and I just sew it onto the fabric, and then I bead right over top of the paper and everything, and I rip the paper off after. My mom and I, we did a few pieces together, and my mom and I did the octopus bag at the CMHR. The octopus bag was a completely sort of like, I remember them asking, it was 2013 that they asked if I could do this piece for the CMHR, not realizing how big it was going to be, like 26 feet high and almost 4 feet wide. And I think that's the only time I said, I really have to think about this. So the process was, you know, it was the amount of time that was going to take. Now, between January and May, of course, there was, you know, the politics and everything else that goes with it. It was about the road allowance, Métis road allowance people. It was the deciding the pattern, the size of beads, the colors, all of that. When my mom and I actually sat down to do that beadwork for that piece, it was the beginning of May, and our contract and our deadline was the end of August. And we did it. It was intense. Okay, it's been a long haul to have beadwork identified as an art form rather than just a craft. Mm-hmm. And I shouldn't say just a craft, because a craft is just as intense as an art form, as an art. So I'm not taking away from, you know, people that certainly that do that, because I have done that for years and it's been looked at as a craft. And some of the things that I do is a craft. But it's only been in the last, say, maybe between 5 and 10 years, if that, that beadwork has been looked at as an art form. Mm-hmm. And which I think it's about time. And it puts it in a different category also, because there's always going to be the craftspeople, and that, you know, and that's great, because we need to use that craft side to get other people involved that maybe don't, you know, or they don't treat it like an art form, but they still love the whole idea of beading. Yeah. So there's, like, okay, for myself, I finally got a piece in an art gallery, which has just been this last, you know, within this last few months. I've had pieces in museums, but, you know, and that kind of, you know, was a different step. Yeah. One of the biggest influences is museums, and the Manitoba Museum, and the Craft Museum and Library also, to be able to look, rather than looking at pieces through glass on displays, to be able to go in the archives and actually look at the pieces and really see how they were made and how they were put together, the colors of beads and the materials that they used at a certain time period. That has been a big influence on my life. You know, it's different when you look at beadwork. But when you actually sit down and even just do a small little piece of beadwork, and even if you don't do any more after that, you have an appreciation for what those women were doing at a certain time period, and even now, of how much work, you know, and you know, the pride that Indigenous people take in their beadwork. Look at them, and you know, a lot of them aren't. Their names aren't on them. They're not identified. They may be identified as, you know, maybe Swampy Cree woman or Soto woman or Métis, but very few of those pieces are identified. And you think of in some cases, some of the conditions that the women had to live through, and yet, in some cases, it's like, well, you know, they must have been happy because they were doing their beadwork, you know. Once you learn how to do beadwork, it's like anything else. It's like, after a while, it can be very relaxing. You know, you have all your beads there, and you know, you're picking out your colors, and the thing is, you have to have good thoughts when you're doing it. You have to feel really good. You can't do it when you're angry or stressed or anything like that. It's here, and I don't think it's ever going to go away again. I think it's always going to be here. But yeah, I think yeah, it's here to stay.